one of the things you go on to say in the film is that being a percussionist isn't just about striking things, it's about drawing sound out from an inner depth of the instruments. Do you want to just elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I think as a percussion player, we haven't quite reached the pinnacle of what we can do. So even although percussion is in fact the oldest family of instruments, we still don't yet have the Stradivarius marimba. We still don't yet have the Steinway vibraphone. We still haven't reached the pinnacle physically of what we can do as far as playing certain instruments are concerned. There is too much to cover in order to get through everything within the percussion world within one lifetime. So you cannot be an expert in African drumming and Indonesian percussion playing and steel drum playing, or all the different styles of snare drumming, such as the Scots style or the Irish or the American and Swiss styles, etc., whereby you can actually spend your lifetime specializing in only one of those styles, and so on and so forth. So really, in a way, we have no option through the many, many objects, the frequencies, the sense of touch, the dynamics, the types of sounds and so on that we deal with. We've got no option but to almost treat every instrument as a child would treat a new toy. And we look at something and we think, well, what is this made of? What's the texture of this? Where would the sound possibly come out of? What would happen if we placed this on this particular surface, or that particular surface, or that stand, or that stand? What would happen if we popped it that way, that way? What would happen if we placed it against our tummies, and so on and so forth? So it isn't just a learning experience for us as the percussion players, but also for you, the audience, as well. So we see you as an extension to the instrument. So how can we project that instrument in a way that is going to sort of intrigue you or involve you? We don't know. An example of that is that we have nowadays a standard 5-octave marimba. It's just a standard Western 5-octave instrument. However, companies now are making a 6-octave instrument, whereby that extra octave is at the low end. That's a huge instrument. Already it's about 9 feet 5. So think about this. You know, you're adding on possibly another 5 feet. That's huge. So physically, I have to think, how do I negotiate this instrument? But for our sound engineers and so on, they have to think, how do we project the sound? How do we record this sound? How do we reinforce this sound? How can we manipulate this sound in all the different types of venues that we happen to be playing in, and so on and so forth? What about the mallet makers, the stick makers? What are they going to make in order for that instrument to speak, not just at the lower end, but at the top end as well? And already this is a big, big challenge. So in a way, the marimba, as it stands at the moment, is almost like 3 different instruments. The high end, which is really like a xylophone, the mid end, which is slightly more mellow and very present, and then this low end, which is very spiritual indeed. Well, not all mallets will cope with all 3 registers, you know. Imagine a violinist where, well, only this bow will deal with the low end of the violin, that bow is much better at the top end, and so on. That's what we have to think about as percussion players.
I was fascinated in the church when you said, I brought these instruments, but I haven't felt inspired to use them. And
well, no, there were certain instruments that I brought that I hadn't used that evening. Yeah, absolutely.
And I was interested as to how you selected the instruments for that concert. How do you, because you have thousands of instruments, how do you go about selecting the ones that, for any one given performance, particularly an improvisation performance, which that was?
Well, for an improvised concert, I have to think of the space that the venue has. And so we did a little bit of homework beforehand to see exactly what kind of space we would have. And then I have to think that I like to have some skinned instruments, so drums. I like to have some mallet or melodic instruments, so marimba is quite handy to have. Vibraphone, which has got the metal alloy bars, is really quite useful too. And then some unusual instruments. So I brought along an instrument that I'd never used before called a halo. And it's almost like an upside-down steel pan. It's almost like a spaceship, but it has these wonderful pictures to it. So I wanted to experiment with that. And then I like to bring along some quirky stuff, so little toys and sound effects and things like that. And that's more for the sound people to have fun with, so that they can play around and manipulate the sounds there. But also, I understand that Fred can be a percussionist, he can be a string player, he can be like an